Hi, welcome to this lecture on scales. Now, we want to see how can we use the scales function. So first, let us look at a full list of available scales. So in order to do that, we're going to use this grep function. So I'm going to come in here and I want the scales function. I'm also going to specify the package. So what I'm doing here, I simply just want a full list of the scales. So I'm going to specify ggplot2. I also want to set value to true. And if I run this, so when I run this, I'm getting this full list of available scales. We may not cover all of these, but we will cover the useful functions of scaling. Say for example, if you can look at this one, it's scale y for aesthetic, then it's discrete. Also there is continuous. So we want to see how can you use some of these functions in order to control the scaling. Now let's start. The first thing that we want to do, we want to see how can we modify the axis. So if we come in here, I'm going to call in this package ggplot2. Okay, now I'm going to try and I'm going to create this scatterplot. So we're going to use this data set for demonstration purposes so that we understand how can we use the scales function. So I'm also going to come in here and I'm going to create the scatterplot. I'm going to use the aesthetic function and say we are examining the relationship between the displacement and miles per gallon. So if I run this, now this is a simple scatter plot that we generated using this geometric layer. Now what we want to see first is how can we take the x and y axis that represent continuous data and try to modify the axis. Now, remember that miles per gallon and displacement, they represent the continuous data. So, if we come here, for example, and we say scale underscore the x-axis, then we pass in continuous, right? Now, if we come in here and use this name argument, remember we had number of arguments. So we're going to see how these arguments work within this scaling function. Now, let's say we want to change the x-axis label. Remember the x-axis represents displacement. Okay, so if you run this, you observe now we have managed to change the x-axis label by making use of this scale function. Okay, remember we can also use xlab function to work with the x-axis label, but in this case for demonstration purposes we are going to be using this scale function. Now we also have the range function that allows us to modify the range. So for example, say we want the x-axis to go from certain lower limit to certain upper limit. Okay, so if we come in here and we come and say limit, I'm going to try and make this a little bit smaller. And now if we come in here and we say limit, and then we come and pass in 0, say for example 0 to 600. So what we are saying here is that we want to modify the range in the x-axis. Now these values will go from 0 to 600. So let's run this. Now what you're observing here is that now we go from 0 to 600. Now if you look at this plot, what you will notice is that the x-axis, they appear at 0, 200, 400 and 600. What if we want to make these sticks to appear more closer? Okay, so what do I mean by that? say we want these ticks to be, say for example, reduced by 50. So in that case comes another useful argument, the breaks. So this argument allows us to specify where the ticks appear. Okay, let us look at this example. So if we come in here, okay, and I say breaks, okay, and then I pass in this vector. Say for example 150, I say 150, I say 300, I say 450. Now let's run this. Now what you're observing here is that we have managed to modify this, and now it starts from 150, 300, then 450. Okay, so with this argument breaks, we are able to specify where the ticks appear. Now, what if you want to change the labels here in the x-axis? Instead of simply just writing this number, you want to write this in weight. So we have another argument called labels. Okay, say for example, we come in here, right? Now, instead of simply just specifying these as numbers, we can pass in labels. So if you come in here and say labels, and you pass in a vector, okay, now let's say for example, I'm going to clear the console. Now let's say we say this is 100 and 5th. Okay, then following is 300, then the following is 450, right? So if you try to run this, now what you are seeing here, we've managed to change the labels, okay, of these ticks. So this argument labels change the labels of the ticks. Okay, we can also go ahead and control the position of the axis. Now, this position of this axis, they are what? They are located below. Okay, so we can also change the position. Say we want to put it at the top. So we can come in here and say position, okay, and then you pass in top and you run this. What you're observing here is that the position of this axis has changed. Okay, we have moved the axis to the top of the plot. We came here and we modified this argument position. We placed the axis at the top.